The greatest trick the unseen ever played was convincing you it wasn't there.
It started with the whisper of leaves against my window, soft and rhythmic, like a hushed warning. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2:17 a.m. The wind shouldn't be strong enough to make the sound, not tonight, not under this eerily perfect full moon. Outside, the glow of the moon painted my suburban street in silver, but the shadows seemed to thicken unnaturally in one spot, the old oak in my backyard. It had always been there, gnarled and ancient, towering over the neighborhood like some forgotten sentinel. Kids used to dare each other to touch it, claiming they'd heard stories of it bleeding sap the color of blood. I had never believed any of that, not until tonight when I saw the bark ripple, like breathing. "Ellie, can you grab some coffee on your way home?" My mom's text popped up as I sat in the break room at the diner. I worked the night shift at Millie's, the kind of small-town greasy spoon that never changed. People knew me as Ellie Marsh, the girl with big dreams and small means. I wanted to leave this dusty corner of Oklahoma, maybe study art in New York City, but life had other plans. Bills to pay, a mom to look after, and an old house that creaked under its own weight kept me anchored. Tonight was quiet at the diner. A couple of regulars lingered over pie and coffee, their voices blending into the low hum of the fluorescent lights. At least the distraction of work kept me from thinking too much about the tree. Ever since I was a kid, I'd had a strange relationship with that oak. It wasn't fear exactly, but unease. My dad, before he left, used to joke that it was older than time itself. He'd carved his initials into it once when he was a teenager, though I could never find them, no matter how hard I searched. The bark seemed to swallow them up. My friend Jake stopped by the counter, his sheriff's badge glinting under the harsh lights. "Another quiet night, huh, Ellie?" I smiled. "Quiet's good. Means no one's flipping out over the moon." Jake chuckled. "Full moon doesn't bring out the crazies. That's just Hollywood nonsense." I didn't tell him about the whispers I'd heard or the way the tree seemed alive. He'd probably laugh, chalk it up to me overthinking like I always did. After work, I swung by the 24-hour convenience store for coffee and headed home. The road stretched long and empty, the fields bathed in moonlight. Something about the night felt off. It wasn't just the brightness of the moon or the silence that pressed against my ears. It was the growing weight in my chest, the feeling that something was waiting. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the tree. The light of my car's headlights cut through the dark, illuminating its massive trunk. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart behind it, but when I blinked, it was gone. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself, grabbing the coffee and heading inside. The house was quiet, my mom already asleep upstairs. I set the coffee on the counter and poured myself a glass of water. The clock on the wall ticked softly, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then it stopped. The ticking ceased so abruptly that it took me a second to realize what had happened. I stared at the clock. 2:17 a.m. The same time I'd seen earlier. A shiver crawled up my spine. The sound of scraping drew my attention to the kitchen window. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped closer. The backyard was bathed in moonlight, the oak standing like a dark monolith in the center. The branches swayed, though there was no wind. And then, I saw it, a face. Just for a moment, peering out from the grooves in the bark, human-like, but distorted, twisted, its eyes gleaming with a pale, unnatural light. My breath caught in my throat. When I blinked, it was gone. I stumbled back, the glass slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. The sound echoed through the empty house, louder than it should have been. My mom's voice called out sleepily from upstairs. "Ellie? Everything okay?" "Yeah," I managed, my voice shaky. Just dropped a glass. I cleaned up quickly, my hands trembling, and locked all the doors and windows. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. But I couldn't explain it. Not yet. As I lay in bed, the tree loomed in my mind, its shadow stretching across my ceiling like a claw. My dad's old words echoed in my ears, older than time itself. What if it wasn't just a tree? What if the stories were true, and it held something beneath its bark, something waiting to wake? The whispers from earlier seemed louder now, threading through my thoughts like a taunt. I couldn't tell if they were coming from outside or inside my own head. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The oak had seen me tonight, and it wasn't finished. The next morning, the world looked deceptively normal. Sunlight poured through my bedroom window, chasing away the lingering shadows of the night before. The oak tree was still there, of course, its branches reaching skyward as if mocking me. I tried to convince myself that the face I'd seen in the bark had been a trick of the light, my overactive imagination playing on my exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. "Ellie, can you take the trash out?" Mom's voice called from downstairs. I grabbed the garbage bag and headed for the backyard, the summer air heavy with humidity. As I approached the tree, my pulse quickened. I wasn't even looking directly at it, but I felt its presence, like a weight pressing on my chest. The ground beneath it seemed darker, the grass brittle and dead. That's when I noticed something new, carvings on the trunk. Fresh ones. I dropped the trash bag and stepped closer, my heart hammering in my ears. Names were etched into the bark, dozens of them, scrawled in jagged, uneven lines. Some of them were familiar, kids I'd gone to school with, neighbors who had moved away. One name sent ice down my spine, Eleanor Marsh. My breath caught. My dad had carved his initials into that tree decades ago, and now my full name was there, as though someone, or something, had been waiting to mark me. I didn't tell Mom about the names. What would I even say? Instead, I spent the day trying to distract myself, running errands and visiting the diner, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The tree lingered in the back of my mind, an unspoken threat. By the time night fell, I was exhausted. I crawled into bed, my thoughts racing, and drifted off into a restless sleep. A sound woke me, a faint tapping. My eyes flew open, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd dreamt it. The room was dark, shadows pooling in the corners. The tapping came again, sharper this time, like knuckles rapping against glass. I turned my head toward the window. My heart stopped. The tree was there, closer than it should have been. Its branches reached out like fingers, one of them scratching lightly against the pane. My breath hitched, and I scrambled for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. When the beam of light hit the window, there was nothing there, no branch, no movement. The oak stood where it always had, its silhouette swaying gently in the night breeze. A false relief washed over me, but it didn't last. A faint creak echoed through the house, followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor downstairs. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No answer. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was dark, save for the moonlight spilling through the windows. The dragging sound came again, a slow, deliberate scrape that set my teeth on edge. I gripped the bat tighter and descended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The living room was empty. I turned toward the kitchen, where the sound seemed to originate. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. When I entered the kitchen, I froze. The back door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I approached it cautiously, peering out into the backyard. The tree stood there, motionless, but something was different. A small object rested at its base, glinting in the moonlight. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside, the cool grass damp beneath my feet. As I got closer, I realized what it was: my dad's old pocket knife. I hadn't seen it in years. He'd taken it with him when he left, and yet here it was, lying in the shadow of the tree. My fingers trembled as I reached down to pick it up, the metal cold against my skin. The blade was clean, but the handle was sticky, as though it had been dipped in sap, or something worse. A low whisper carried on the breeze, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time, threading through the air like a melody. "Ellie. Ellie." I staggered back, my chest tightening with fear. The tree's bark rippled, and the names carved into it seemed to shift, the letters rearranging themselves into new words. I couldn't look away. It was like the tree was alive, breathing, watching me. "Ellie," a voice called from behind me. I spun around, the knife slipping from my hand. Jake stood at the edge of the yard, his flashlight cutting through the dark. "What are you doing out here?" I stammered, trying to explain, but the words caught in my throat. When I turned back to the tree, the carvings were gone. The bark was smooth, unmarked, as though nothing had ever been there. I thought I heard something, I managed, my voice shaky. Jake frowned. "You're not the only one. Mrs. Holcomb down the street called in earlier, said she saw someone standing in her yard, but when I got there, no one was around." He shone his flashlight at the tree, the beam catching on its knotted surface. "You okay, Ellie? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." Jake nodded, but his concern was evident. "Well, call me if you need anything. I'll be on patrol." As he walked away, I glanced back at the tree one last time. The moonlight illuminated its twisted branches, casting eerie shadows across the yard. I could have sworn I saw movement, just beneath the bark, a faint pulse, like the beat of a heart. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the tree. The events of the night felt like a fever dream, but the pocket knife was still on my bedside table, its sticky residue a grim reminder. I needed answers. I remembered the stories my dad used to tell me about the tree, how it was older than anyone could remember, how strange things always seemed to happen around it. Kids disappearing, crops failing, sudden storms. He used to say it was cursed, that people had tried to cut it down, but always failed. "The tree decides who stays and who goes," he'd said once, laughing like it was a joke. But now, it didn't feel funny. I drove to the library, searching through old records and newspapers. It didn't take long to find something. The oak had been there for centuries, long before the town was even founded. Stories of strange occurrences surrounded it, farmers finding livestock drained of blood, children vanishing, and, most disturbingly, a string of deaths every 30 years, each one linked to someone who lived on my street. The names of the victims jumped out at me. They matched the ones I'd seen carved into the bark. My hands shook as I scanned through the documents. One article caught my attention, a journal entry from a settler in the 1800s. It described a ritual performed under a full moon, an offering meant to appease the tree. "Blood for the roots," it read. "Lest the tree claim its own." The full moon. The whispers. The carvings. It all fit together too perfectly. But then, a thought struck me. If the tree demanded blood, why had it waited until now? That night, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the sky itself was pressing down on the earth. I sat in my room, staring at the knife, debating whether to tell my mom what I'd discovered. But what could I say? That the tree in our backyard was cursed and might try to kill us? A loud thud shattered my thoughts. It came from outside. Heart racing, I grabbed the knife and crept to the window. The tree was closer again, its roots bulging out of the ground like claws. One of its massive branches had struck the side of the house, leaving a jagged crack in the siding. The whispers started, louder this time, echoing through the night. Ellie. Ellie, they weren't coming from outside. They were inside the house. The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it, the screen lighting up with a single message, "Come outside." The sender was unknown. I didn't want to go, but the whispers were growing louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the very air humming with tension. My mom's voice called from downstairs. "Ellie? What's going on?" "I don't know." I shouted back, but when I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. She wasn't there. The house was empty. The whispers turned into a roar, a deafening cacophony that drowned out my thoughts. The front door burst open, and I was pulled forward by an unseen force, the knife still clutched in my hand. I stumbled outside, the cool night air hitting my face. The tree was alive. Its branches twisted and writhed like serpents, the bark splitting open to reveal something horrifying: faces. Dozens of them, their mouths moving in unison, forming the whispers that had haunted me. And at the center of it all was one face I recognized: my dad. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice breaking. His eyes snapped open, glowing with an unnatural light. His mouth moved, but the words weren't his. "The debt must be paid. Blood for the roots." The ground beneath me trembled, and I fell to my knees. Roots shot up from the earth, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me toward the tree. I screamed, slashing at them with the knife, but they were relentless. The whispers turned into a chant, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. "Blood for the roots. Blood for the roots." The tree's bark split further, revealing a gaping maw, its insides pulsing like a living organism. "No!" I shouted, struggling against the roots. "Take me, but leave my mom alone." The chanting stopped. For a moment, the world was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The tree seemed to hesitate, its branches curling inward as if considering my words. Then, with a deafening crack, it released me. The roots receded, and the faces and the bark began to fade. I stumbled back, gasping for air, the knife slipping from my hand. The tree's branches fell still, its monstrous form retreating into the shadows. But as I stood there, trembling, I realized the truth. The tree hadn't spared me. It had marked me. The next morning, I woke to find the names on the tree gone. The whispers were silent, the air still. My mom didn't remember anything unusual from the night before, and I didn't try to explain. But I knew it wasn't over. The pocket knife sat on my nightstand, its handle stained with something dark. And when I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw something that hadn't been there before, a faint line etched into my skin, curling around my wrist like a root. The tree had let me go, but it wasn't done with me. It was waiting. And the next full moon wasn't far away. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I avoided the backyard entirely, pretending the tree wasn't there. My mom never questioned it, she assumed I was just busy with work or distracted by my usual big city dreams. But deep down, I knew the tree wasn't finished with me. The mark on my wrist, faint at first, had begun to darken. It looked like a scar at a glance, but when I traced it with my fingers, it felt alive, pulsing faintly beneath my skin. Something was growing. One night, unable to bear the suffocating tension anymore, I decided to leave. Just pack a bag, take my savings, and drive as far as I could. New York, maybe. Anywhere but here. But as I zipped my duffel bag shut, the air in the room seemed to shift. It grew heavy, thick with the scent of earth and rot. The whispers were back. "Ellie. Ellie. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The mirror on my dresser was fogged over, and faint letters appeared in the condensation, as though traced by an invisible hand, "Come to me." I should have run. I should have jumped in my car and driven until the gas ran out. But something stronger than fear pulled me to the backyard. It wasn't just the whispers, it was the mark on my wrist. It burned now, hot and insistent, tugging me like a leash. The tree loomed before me, more monstrous than ever. Its branches twisted against the night sky like skeletal hands. The ground around its base was bare, the grass scorched to ash. And there, embedded in its trunk, was something I couldn't look away from, a human figure, frozen in the bark. It was me. My face, my body, perfectly etched into the tree as though I'd been swallowed whole and preserved in its wood. My doppelganger's eyes were wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." But it was. The tree was showing me something, and I didn't understand it, yet. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me. The ground trembled, and a root burst forth, snaking toward me. I screamed, but there was no one to hear me. The root wrapped around my ankle, dragging me closer to the tree. My nails dug into the dirt as I fought against it, but it was no use. "Why me?" I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "What do you want from me?" The tree didn't answer. Instead, my reflection in its bark began to move. Its mouth opened, and a voice emerged, my voice, but distorted, deeper, ancient. "You don't understand, Ellie. You were never the victim." The words hit me like a blow, and for a moment, I stopped struggling. "What are you talking about?" The voice laughed, a sound that resonated deep in my chest. "The blood for the roots. The sacrifice. It wasn't for me. It was for you." A flood of memories surged through my mind, things I didn't recognize, yet felt intimately familiar. A circle of people under a full moon, chanting as they stood around the tree. A knife in my hand, its blade dripping red. My father's voice, pleading. "Please, Ellie. Don't do this." I gasped, clutching my head as the memories overwhelmed me. It wasn't the tree that was cursed. It was me. Generations of my family had been bound to this tree, feeding it, keeping it alive. My father had tried to break the cycle, to take me away before it could claim me, but I had already been marked. The mark on my wrist wasn't a curse, it was a signature. A promise. "You're lying," I whispered, my voice trembling. The tree's laughter shook the ground. "Lying? No, Ellie. You chose this. You sealed the deal long before you ever understood what it meant. And now, it's time to pay." The root tightened around my ankle, dragging me toward the tree's gaping maw. Faces began to emerge from the bark, my father's among them. His eyes were wide with sorrow, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear. But I didn't need to hear them. I knew what he was saying. "I tried to save you." A surge of anger welled up in me, stronger than my fear. "No!" I screamed, grabbing the knife from my pocket. I slashed at the root, the blade cutting deep, but it was like slicing into stone. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, the faces in the bark contorting in agony. And then, I understood. The tree wasn't trying to take me. It was me. My essence, my soul, was tied to it. Every sacrifice had fed not the tree, but the part of me that had been bound to it, a dark, insatiable part one hadn't known existed. Killing the tree would mean killing myself. But letting it live meant countless others would suffer. Tears blurred my vision as I raised the knife. The tree's laughter turned into a shriek, a sound so piercing it felt like it would split my skull. I drove the blade into the mark on my wrist, the pain blinding, and the world exploded into darkness. I woke to the sound of birds. The sun was rising, casting warm light over the backyard. The tree was gone. Not cut down, not burned, just gone, as though it had never existed. The grass was green, the ground unscarred. But the mark on my wrist was still there, faded but present, a reminder of what had been. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw something else, a flicker of movement in my reflection, a shadow that didn't belong. The tree wasn't gone. It was inside me now, waiting. And the next time the full moon rose, I knew it would take root again. Only this time, there would be no escaping it.